You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and joined as always by your co-hosts Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how we doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. So starting to get some news from the NFL world, right? Which is always a good thing. A lot of players hitting the pup list, right? Lots and lots of players hitting that pup list. So I don't know. The good thing about it being this time of year is they can come off at any time. So it's not like in the regular season where you're gonna be missing games. It could just be, they're nursing a little bit of this, that, and the other, and they need to designate it due to NFL rules and regulations. So nothing overly to be concerned of. Sounds like TJ Hawkinson's rehab is going well, that he could possibly be ahead of schedule. Sounds like Nick Chubb's rehab is going well. He could possibly be ahead of schedule here a little bit. So those are both good things. CeeDee Lamb says, I'm not showing up until you pay me. Brandon Ayuk said, I want to get traded, but I'm still going to show up, which I found very interesting. I guess good for him, right? Like for all the kind of melodrama that's been going on around him and San Francisco here this offseason, for him to, suit up, right? And come in and do his due diligence, right? And be with the team. Like, he realizes that if he's a 49er, like, there's still a really good chance you guys are getting back to the Super Bowl. So, be a part of that and enjoy the ride, if you will. But, I mean, heck, man, outside of that, always changing. So lots of drafts going on, whether it's best ball, dynasty, jumping in some earlier redraft leagues, like all about it right now. So just getting after it. But right now, I'm enjoying the time here with you guys.
Seconded there, Kevin. I will give you another wide receiver news that maybe doesn't have a huge impact, but still a guy that probably was going to find his way onto some rosters, and that is Michael Gallup calling it a career. He was expected to compete as a third wide receiver there in Vegas with the Raiders, but he was just on the one-year deal in Colorado State represent. He's calling it a career at the ripe old age of 28, which if I could retire at 28, well, I didn't. So I still had plenty of student loans to pay at 28. Still have plenty of student loans to pay, well past 28. So good on Michael Gallup. What a career. Was very useful for several fantasy owners there for a couple of years.
Fair enough. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of camp news coming out there as well, and we'll kind of get to that here in a little bit. But going off on a tangent, we're live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Instagram, but not on Twitter, now X, whatever they want to call it, because they require all of these shenanigans now to try and stream on X. So if you were planning on tuning into the Twitter/X, find us over on YouTube, youtube.com/@goodoldboysff. And while you're there, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button. Hit the comments up. We love chatting and interacting there. So just kind of throw that out there for anybody that might have been trying to search for that on Twitter.
Did I anger him when I said it'll always be called Twitter? Just
maybe.
Like it'll always be the Pac-12. I wonder if I angered old Mr. Musk. It's going to be a neighbor of mine here soon.
Sounds like it. Heading to Texas. So
it's hot. It's not hot right now, but typically it's hot.
Facts. There were facts there. Alrighty. Any other? Now that we kind of went on for the weeds there, any kind of camp news that we want to hit up? Any news notes that we want to rock and roll through?
There's really not too much other than some wide receiver drama, as Kevin has alluded to, and the Michael Gallup news. We haven't really seen too much, although I will say we're just a couple weeks away now from like an actual NFL football game. I'm sure it's the Hall of Fame game and it's week 0 of the preseason, but there will be NFL football players playing football in just a couple weeks' time here, and that's exciting. we are probably, if you're not, if we're in the, hey, we got to figure out when we're going to draft mode for the home league, for the namesake. And we'll probably have those discussions here over the next couple of weeks to figure out.
Yeah, I got to text some people and tell them to turn the notifications back on.
And Craig, if you're listening, re-download the damn app. Because I know he likes to offload it in the off season to free up some space on his phone. Buy a new phone, right? You do well enough there. Buy a new phone, get you some extra storage.
You're a lawyer, for God's sake. I figured it out.
For God's sake. Talk about student loans. Anyways, that's my Craig tangent, and we'll move on from there. But yeah, we'll be in draft mode here for the namesake league. I know there's drafts coming up for a lot of these teams, and you've heard us say it once, you'll hear us say it 1,000 times again. Pay attention to what's going on at camp. It will benefit you in the long run. You'll be able to pull a couple fast ones over people in your league that are just scooting by.
Right. Yeah. The folks that are out there that are already prepping and preparing for those drafts that are happening later in August, early September. Kudos to you, and for everybody else that hasn't quite gotten into that mode. We will be having all of those little bite-sized clips and player profile videos hitting the YouTube channel very soon. So make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button. Ring that bell. You'll get notified every time one of those goes live. All right. I think I've probably tried to pump up the YouTube channel there, more times tonight than we've done the last couple of weeks. So anyway, any other news notes? Are we ready to start hitting up some running backs tonight?
Let's do it.
All righty. We're going to go ahead and start with the running back that's coming off the board, kind of ADP 50 at the position, and that is Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson, now with the New England Patriots, last season was with Washington, had 65 rush attempts for 265 yards, 1 touchdown. Through the air, though, had 48 receptions on 59 targets, 389 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Antonio Gibson?
So, Antonio Gibson has statistically gotten worse every year for the last 3 years. In Washington, and coming into New England, he's going to be playing backup to Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not expecting a whole bunch here, right? Like, he's another one of those guys. He's starting on the non-football injury list. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but this New England offense, I do think, is going to struggle to move the ball regardless. So Stevenson, yeah, like, I'll get a piece of Stevenson here or there, but as far as Antonio Gibson, he is a player that I am not interested in here at the moment. I don't think he's going to be, the next James White for the New England Patriots. Maybe a spell back. He played 16 games last year and only had 65 attempts. So I don't know, maybe he sees a few more, right? Maybe he sees 85 touches this year out of the backfield, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to change his overall fantasy outlook. So it's all going to come down to if he sneaks in the end zone or not, and I don't want to gamble on that. So I am going to be passing on Antonio Gibson here at this current moment.
And I'm not even sure he has, like, handcuff upside because it doesn't seem like he does. So, like, even if you are getting, Ramondre Stevenson, you don't even need Gibson as the handcuff there because it just doesn't feel like who knows? There's so many unknowns with this New England team. That is a team that I will be paying attention to what's going on there at camp, trying to figure out how this team is going to operate and look with the new head coach, with new offense, all that fun stuff. So, but I think I'm with you, Kevin. I think at this point, look, we're talking about running back 50. These are deep leagues where you're going to be getting down to the 50th running back. If you're faced with the opportunity to draft Antonio Gibson as the 50th running back to come off the board in your league, maybe go grab a third tight end or something, because I don't know that it's going to be worth your value here. Even if he is the backup, they still, as we sit here and talk about it, Kevin Harris and JaMychal Hasty are still, on the roster. And who knows, with him being on the non-football injury list, I don't know what that injury is. There's not much about it other than he went on it today as we're recording this. So yeah, I'm not huge on Gibson this year.
Fair enough, and I can certainly kind of understand that because he's, Kevin mentioned it earlier, certainly kind of gone backwards the last couple of seasons here. But even last year, right, with only 65 attempts, still managed to finish, running back 45 overall on the season. So this is one of those that if you're drafting him with the 50th running back off the board, there's still some potential value for this. There's still, ample opportunity for him to finish inside RB 50 when it's all said and done. Do I think that he's going to drastically outperform that? No. Like at best, we're talking maybe RB 3 territory type of finish. But he does pose a little bit of an intrigue to me as far as a handcuff goes in New England, because if Ramadre goes down, misses some time, at that point, Antonio Gibson does have the skill set to be able to, make his way onto the field, right? He can run between the tackles a little bit, can get outside, is a really good pass catching type of back there and pretty good at pass pro. So there's some opportunity that he could find the field if Ramadre goes down, and there's some value intrigue for me around that. But as a standalone piece, no, there really isn't. I think this is kind of floor and ceiling kind of wrapped up into one as a standalone piece there. Any other thoughts on Ramadre? All right.
Not Ramadre, Antonio Gibson.
Yes, Antonio Gibson. Any thoughts on Antonio Gibson?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and head on over to the next guy on the list, and that is Jalen Wright. Jalen Wright, the rookie coming in out of Tennessee, heading to the Dolphins. Thoughts on Jalen Wright?
So another speedster coming out of Tennessee. For a little while there, he was kind of sneaking up draft boards and just kind of creeping his way up. He's settled in here a little bit. I have mild interest in Jalen Wright because Miami does run a true two-back system, right? And we expect it to be Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane here to start the season. Mostert has a career probability of getting nicked up, right? He's a little bit older right now, still super quick, but really has not always done the best about playing all 17 games. And then we saw Devon Achane. He went down last year and missed some time as well. So in deeper leagues, I don't mind the flyer on Jalen Wright because he's one injury away from seeing a pretty sizable workload, or what could be a pretty sizable workload in this Miami offense. So as long as he's picking up the protection schemes and he's not completely damning Tua, I think he's going to see some volume here. Again, deeper leagues only. Other than that, I'm going to keep an eye on him in like your standard Yahoo or ESPN league where your benches aren't very deep. But he's a guy that I'm putting a star next to. Like, I'm going to be checking this out because, again, he is one of those guys, and how this offense is functioning, he's one injury away from having a pretty serviceable workload as a bench player on your fantasy roster. So when it's all said and done with, I expect him to be higher than running back 49. So I believe there's some built-in value, but you have to have a deeper league to be able to just stash him there. Otherwise, I think I'm going to be looking at potentially another wide receiver here this late, maybe a backup tight end, something like that, who can add maybe some more consistent value to what I need out of my fantasy roster. But there's some upside here with Wright for sure.
So here's what I like about Jalen Wright. He's built the same as Raheem Mostert, right? He's same height, about 5 pounds heavier. Here's what I don't like about Jalen Wright. He's built the same as Jeff Wilson, who is also on this roster, who brings experience. Here's what I like about Jalen Wright. There's not as much tread taken off of those tires, right? Let me say that again. There's more tread on those tires than there is for Raheem Mostert or Jeff Wilson, being that he is a rookie. So here's how I'm looking at Jalen Wright. If I have the space for him, yes, I like the piece of Miami's offense. And I think that if I have Raheem Mostert, I want to get a Jalen Wright to defend against to give me kind of that handcuff, because I do see them kind of fulfilling the same role. If I have Devon Achane and I grab a Jalen Wright, I'm not as thrilled about that, because I don't know that they fulfill the same role while the touches might go up, right? I think Devon Achane is a special player in who he is, and Jalen Wright isn't that guy. He more fills in for what Raheem Mostert does. So if I have Mostert, I'm really wanting Wright way late. If I have Achane, I'm not so interested in getting Wright later on. Not to say that I wouldn't draft him. I just not as interested in it because they're not the same style of back. So I think that there is value there. And to Kevin's point earlier, Raheem Mostert has had some health aversions throughout the course of his career. And I think Jalen Wright is going to be the benefactor of that. So deep leagues where you can stash him, or if you're not in a deep league and you're paying attention to when, I hate to say that, when Raheem Mostert doesn't play, Jalen Wright's a great waiver ad if he's available and out there, but you just have to pay attention to when that is.
Fair enough. And it's not like Devon Achane was a model of health in his rookie year either. So this is one of those that he is one guy away from seeing some potentially good volume, right? And this is a Miami offense that certainly loves to utilize their running backs. They've got a bunch of them on the roster. They all got a lot of speed and a lot of upward type of speed there as well. So this is a guy that if I have either Mostert or I have Achane, I certainly don't have a problem handcuffing. But to Kevin's point there again, like if it's a shorter bench type of league, I'm just going to keep an eye on him and spend up on fab, things like that if it comes down to it. But Jalen Wright certainly worth those deeper rounds and those later rounds as a potential flyer. Especially love the flyer on him in a best ball type of format. Any other thoughts on Jalen Wright?
No, I don't think. Is he in position to return kicks? I'm trying to think. I don't know that he actually did that for Tennessee. So never mind.
Check their depth chart real quick. If you can stall for just a second.
Yeah, I'm kind of scrolling through their depth chart as well just to see what their thoughts are. I don't know. Like I don't remember him doing that at Tennessee. Now,
so they have him as
on special teams to continue to make the roster, right? Like that is something he will do, but I don't see him in the back. Maybe kickoffs, but probably not punts.
So Braxton Berrios is listed right now as the punt returner, kick returner on ESPN. Take that for a grain of salt. It's the end of July. Braxton Berrios is there, but Jalen Wright is on the 2 deep there.
Okay, so that could be a way to get him touches, especially with how these new kickoffs are running, right?
Yes.
Like, because the idea is, right, that's where the mad scientists are in the lab right now. Whoever can break the code.
We're going to see returns.
Kickoffs and turns, and if you're getting return yardage, again, a guy who could add value. Again, this is deep league stuff, right? But again, these are all reasons why we like this kid, right? Those are the consensus across the board. We do like this kid. We see some upside. So definitely a player to keep your eye on.
All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at next guy up here. Kamani Vidal is next up on the list. And Kamani Vidal coming in as a rookie out of Troy, heading to the Los Angeles Chargers. Thoughts on Vidal?
I'm so torn on this kid. I'm so torn. Look, we know Jim Harbaugh wants to run the football there in LA, right? We know that they echoed that by going out and signing Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Now here's what I have the issue with Vidal is he's playing third fiddle to Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. But will it be third fiddle for the whole season? Probably not. Because as we know, those two, they play a violent brand of football, both Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, and violent brands of football lead to injuries. It's just a fact of life. So I don't know how much of a Vidal we're going to get in year one. And I think we'll get some, but I'm not sure it's enough to justify a draft pick.
Yeah, I'd agree with this, right? I mean, got Edwards leading the way, Dobbins. We got to see how he's coming back from this injury, and he's got to show he can stay healthy. Spiller has some time in the NFL, but he didn't light the world on fire. So it is interesting with as much as we think Harbaugh's going to run the ball. Vidal's going to make the roster. Like, I think we all believe that. It's just a matter of, is it's only going to be in special teams here his rookie year, or is he actually going to have a role? There's some other players in this late range that I think I'd rather have. You know, we'll keep an eye on it as we inch closer to the kickoff, the kickoff of the regular season. And yeah, maybe we sacrifice a little bit of draft position, some value there, but at this moment, I'm looking elsewhere. Like, I'm just not sold enough that he's going to see a ton of time. Harbaugh strikes me as a guy who wants that veteran leadership. That's why he brought Edwards in. That's why he brought over Dobbins, right? Like, he's going to run the ball, but he wants guys who know how to run it in an NFL offense. So I don't know that this is Vidal's year.
Right. And all of that to say too, right? Like, it's not just Harbaugh that wants to run the ball. They brought in Greg Roman to be the offensive coordinator, and we've seen what Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins have done in a Greg Roman offense in the past, right? Both of those guys with him in Baltimore. So I think there's some of that yes, there'll probably be some different wrinkles there, but this isn't a drastically new playbook or offensive scheme for either one of those players. Whereas Vidal's coming in and requiring to learn that a little bit. And this is, again, one of those that with kind of, when you look at it, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal, kind of all in a similar kind of grouping almost. Like, they're all kind of within about 10 RB slots of each other here. And all kind of in that 40 to 52 range when you're talking about ADP at the position. So that is one of those that's in a deeper league, sure, maybe a late round flyer. In a best ball league, sure, I'm taking that shot there. But this is a guy that I'm more so wanting to see how this offense shapes up and how they're going to utilize this and really kind of come to play before I really want to go out there and spend draft capital in a lot of other type of leagues. Any other thoughts on Kamani Vidal?
Negative.
All righty, let's go ahead and hit up the next guy on the list, Chuba Hubbard. And Chuba Hubbard last season, 238 attempts, 902 yards, 5 touchdowns, had 39 receptions for 44 targets, 233 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Thoughts on Chuba Hubbard?
What am I missing? What am I missing here?
He's going too late, right? Like,
Yes.
This is the Jonathan Brooks effect, and everyone just falling in love with him, and people not really paying attention. Like, he's got to show that he's rehabbed from this injury, right? I don't think the Panthers are going to rush their young running back into play. So Chuba's going to get some run here, I think, especially to start the season. Miles Sanders is technically still there, and sure, this sounds like now that we're ready to write off Miles Sanders that he's going to come on a warpath and he's going to find a way to sneak out another 2-year contract after this year's up or whatever. But I mean, as it stands, I'd tell you there's some real value in Chuba Hubbard. So again, to start the season as an RB4 on your roster, you could do a lot worse than this, right? This is a guy who's going to see touches right away. Yes, he got a little bit of work out of the backfield. A lot of that wasn't Young's game, right? He just didn't throw to the running back a whole lot, but they didn't run the ball, they didn't throw the ball a whole heck of a lot, especially the back half of the season. They got really conservative as the year went on. Bryce Young was struggling. A lot of it was the offensive cohesion. But Chuba was just outside of RB2 territory last year, and now all of a sudden he drops 20 to 23 spots just because Brooks is in town, when there's no guarantee Brooks is going to play all season just because he's rehabbing. Like, I think there's still value in Hubbard this year. So I like him here as you're trying to fill out your running back room. And what you're hoping is he starts the season off with a bang, and then you want to flip him to the Brooks owner.
Yeah, we're talking. So 152nd overall, that's 11th round 12th round, longer than 12th round,
13th.
right? 13th
Round
round.
13.
Yeah.
Man, if Chuba Hubbard, who for all intents and purposes looks like he's going to be the lead back at least as we start the season, right? Probably for the first couple of weeks, because not only is Jonathan Brooks needing to get healthy from that injury, he's also having to learn how to be an NFL football player, learn an NFL offense, a completely new offense, I might add, and make sure that he doesn't get Bryce Young killed on missing a blitz pickup. These are growing pains for young running backs that maybe weren't used to doing that in college, right? Texas's offense, I don't know how much they asked the running backs to pass pro, right? Like usually you don't need to in college. So like it's a new skill that they have to pick up. So I like Chuba Hubbard. If I'm in the 13th round and Chuba Hubbard's still staring me right in the face, like draft and move on. Again, like what Kevin said, you may only get him for the first 4 weeks of the season, but I tell you what, having him for the first 4 weeks of the season and maybe you flip him if you can get it, or he just fizzles out and becomes a non-factor. But I think you get a true lead running back for the first couple weeks of the season, and that's helpful in the 13th round. You're not going to find that everywhere.
No, it helps your flex, right? It
Yeah.
gives you flexibility at your flex position, or if you have some crazy early sprained ankle or sore hamstring or whatever else, to be able to flip a guy in like this where you know he's going to see touches. Like, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And this is one of those two that, like, last season, his efficiency was bad, right? Was just plain awful. Yeah, and when you look at a lot of kind of those pieces of the analytics, they don't shine brightly. But this is a guy that came in and took the job away from Miles Sanders, who they brought in on a pretty good free agent contract coming into last season, and kind of once he came in, he was towards the back half of the season was in RB2 territory. Weeks 6 through 18, he finished inside running back 24. So, yeah, well, season long finished just outside of that. Didn't see a whole lot of work those first few weeks there. So there is something to be said about this one. And I think you're right. I think the Jonathan Brooks, is scaring kind of a lot of people off and driving the value down on this one. And right there with you, right? In a 13th round pick, like this is a hard guy to not look at and go, yes, please, and move on. So I do think that Chuba Hubbard is some tremendous value coming off the board where he is. Any other thoughts on Chuba? All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at Ty Chandler. And Ty Chandler last season had 102 rush attempts, 461 yards at 3 touchdowns, 21 receptions, 25 targets, 159 yards through the air. Thoughts on Ty Chandler?
So I have a little bit of interest in Ty Chandler only because Aaron Jones hasn't played a full NFL season in the last 4 years. He just continues to get nicked up a little bit. So again, not that he's a handcuff, but I do think he has intrigue to him as far as being able to be useful, because there's going to be a few weeks, seemingly, if we go off of history, where Ty Chandler is going to have like lead dog duties there in Minnesota. So now you just have to kind of bank on, do you believe that Minnesota is going to be able to move the ball well enough to have those weeks turn out to be useful, right? And you're not just off of the playmaking ability and veteran prowess of an Aaron Jones. So again, I don't know that I'm necessarily drafting Ty Chandler, but I think he's a guy who's going to be on and off the waiver wire here a little bit throughout the season in redraft leagues. So I don't know that this is a guy that you need to pick up in the draft and then just sit on. I think you can kind of pick your spot, and then, if you got to go out and spend a little bit of extra fab because you're tight and you need a running back and it's going to be his week, then so be it, you do. But he's not a guy that at this moment I want to just sit on a bench and just take up a valuable roster spot for me.
Yeah, I don't mind him because he's an efficient receiver, not an overwhelming receiver, but an efficient receiver. We anticipate J.J. McCarthy starts sooner rather than later, right? If it's not week 1, it's probably pretty soon after that. and a good pass catching tight end, a good pass catching running back are all very good safety nets and security blankets for young quarterbacks. Ty Chandler last season, 21 catches on 25 targets, 159 yards, was efficient in the passing game there in Minnesota. So if he can have that as a supplemental piece to what Kevin is saying, as he will likely probably be lead back at some point at whatever game it might be in the season when Aaron Jones has a game or two where he's unavailable. I think there is some value there, but I will echo Kevin's sentiment too, and while I say there is value, in the same breath I'll say that it's a wait and see value that I'm not sure is worth tying up a roster spot.
Yeah, this is one of those that, I don't know that the short of significant time being missed by Aaron Jones, that you're going to see Ty Chandler outperform, running back 42, 43 on the season. So this kind of feels like you're drafting him at about where he'll finish. Even if he gets in there for a couple of games like that.
You just want the high weeks, right? Like, and that's what I was saying. I don't want him just to take up a spot on my bench, because I think you're right. Like, his finishing spot is probably right around here. But if I'm pinched and I got to spend some fab, or if you're still doing rotational waivers, you happen to be up, this may not be a bad option as a Band-Aid for a week, because it'll be better than a zero.
Right, and he'll provide some of those flashes here and there, but best ball in a deep best ball, sure. That's an okay spot to rock and roll there. But yeah, I'm with you. It's more of a sit back and play the waiver wire for him. Any other thoughts on Ty Chandler? All right, let's go ahead and take a look at Marshawn Lloyd. And Marshawn Lloyd, the rookie out of USC, heading to the Green Bay Packers. Thoughts on Marshawn Lloyd?
So I like this kid. This kid's picking up some steam. He's picking up some buzz right away. It would not surprise me to see him be the true number 2 behind Josh Jacobs. And I'm not convinced that Josh Jacobs is going to see, 300 plus touches in Green Bay. I think you might see more of a 60-40 split type deal. So I think Lloyd has some real value here. I think he's going to be used. Now, he's on the PUP list, right? Another one of those guys. So he is, as a rookie, missing some pretty valuable snaps as we get started here. So the longer his stint on the PUP list lasts, the less I am intrigued. But through OTAs and rookie minicamp and everything else, he was doing a lot of really good things, and it caught the coach's attention. So, if they're calling him out by name, it's now catching my attention, right? And it's just something that I'm going to make sure I'm paying attention to.
So AJ Dillon's still on the roster. And I think you're right, Kevin. I think eventually Marshawn Lloyd supplants him as the second running back behind Josh Jacobs. I want a piece of this offense. I think where you're getting Marshawn Lloyd here, I think it is worth the flyer. So I'm okay with taking him here. If he's available here back into the 12th, yeah, I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with waiting to see what Josh Jacobs looks like in this offense, how Marshawn Lloyd, I feel like he is worth the stash.
Fair enough. And I can certainly see that. Interestingly enough, though, Marshawn Lloyd is being drafted over AJ Dillon in most fantasy drafts there. Which I think that kind of speaks to where everybody thinks that'll end up, season end type of thing. And where he's coming off the board, he very well may outkick that coverage and outkick that ADP. It wouldn't surprise me if we see him potentially sneak up into, running back 3 type of territory. It also wouldn't surprise me to see him kind of finish kind of right where he is. So this is one of those that you're kind of drafting some upside here. There's some potential here, but there's also a lot of that Yeah, he may be available on the waiver early on in the season, and that might be worth keeping an eye on there as well. So, any other thoughts on Marshawn Lloyd? All right, let's go ahead and move on over to Rico Dwaddle. And Rico Dwaddle last year, 89 rush attempts, 361 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 17 receptions on 22 targets for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Rico Dwaddle?
He's a piece, right? Like I'm just not in love with any of the Cowboys running backs. Zeke for nostalgia purposes and because I think he's going to see the goal line work in Dallas. But outside of that, I mean, these guys got to get touches, right? Like you can't rely on Zeke to touch the ball 20 times a game anymore. He's got to be a 13 to 15 touch guy at maximum. You figure 3 to 5 of those touches are going to be in the red zone every single week. So, I mean, these guys are going to get some run, whether it's Dowdle or, you know, Deuce Vaughn, you know, Malik Davis, if he's on the active roster, you know, so they're going to have to find something out at running back. It can't just be all Zeke. So, again, maybe I just keep an eye on him, but there's other guys in this range that I like. Like I would rather have a Marshawn Lloyd. Okay. The guy we just talked about. I would rather go him. I would rather drop a couple down and reach a little bit for Chuba Hubbard. Again, like we talked about all those things. So, potential value, but I mean, he's basically been non-existent coming into his 5th NFL season. If he hasn't flashed and showed it enough now to get consistent touches, it's probably not going to happen. So I'm not a believer in the talent as far as star power in the NFL goes. So I'm going to find some other, I'm going to find another player in this range. Again, whether it's another wide receiver, whether it's tight end, you know, shifting down to a different running back, all the different options. But this is not the piece of the Cowboys offense that I want. I want pass catchers. I do not want ball carriers.
Doesn't it feel like the Cowboys are going to have Zeke, and then it's just like you're never quite sure which other running back will come in and take the snap? Like you know that there's a backup running back. You're just not sure which one that backup running back actually is. Yeah. It just feels like you're going to it's just going to be so frustrating because you hope that you have the right one on your roster, but I'm not sure that you know, like week to week, it could be different. Hell, series to series, it could be different. I'm not really sure what this Dallas offense is going to be after Zeke, especially with the running game. So I don't want any part of this. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, this is a tough one to kind of get behind there because last year the Cowboys running back room was anemic throughout a lot of the season there, and Rico Dwaddle was part of it then, and couldn't kind of plant his flag and supplant guys on the roster ahead of him to kind of eke that out. And I don't know that we're going to necessarily see that change with an aging Zeke. And yeah, this is again one of those that this feels like a change of pace type of back, a spell back type of thing that, yeah, he may come in if we see an injury type of thing, and that may be that. But I don't know that we're going to necessarily see him supplant Zeke in this role, and especially with as much as I think that this offense is going to pass the ball. There are very few running backs as good as pass pro as Zeke in this, and that will equal Zeke on the field a lot. So, Rico's a guy that if you want to try and take a shot and on that you can, but I am not looking to be drafting him really on any roster of mine. Any thoughts on Rico Dwaddle? All right, let's go ahead and head on over to Kendre Miller. And Kendre Miller, last season, 41 rush attempts, 156 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 10 receptions, 11 targets, 117 yards to the air. Thoughts on Kendre Miller?
So Miller's a guy that I really like. Showed a little bit of pop last year before being injured. So Obviously, we're maybe slightly concerned about that, but he had tons of pop at TCU as well. He was definitely a part of that offense to help get them to the national championship game. And we saw brief instances of that, but very explosive in the passing game. Right, was averaging over 10 yards, 10 yards per target. There, even on limited work. 41 attempts, 156 yards, so only 3.8. So that wasn't necessarily mind blowing, but the Saints kind of struggled to run the ball a little bit last year anyway. So nevertheless, I like this option, right? We're getting deeper in the draft. He's a guy that I don't mind taking a flyer on. A young guy with some upside. Alvin Kamara is getting a little bit older, while I still think he's going to get first billing. Kendre Miller is a guy that, I might look at if I'm a Kamara owner, right? Like, do I look at that as a potential handcuff? Maybe, but I do think once we get kind of midway through the season, we'll find that Miller has some standalone value at his own, because I do expect him to finish higher than the RB 43 tag that he's coming off the board at right now.
Do you think he is more valuable than Jamal Williams? Because that right now is, if you're looking at the depth chart, it's Kamara, it's Jamal Williams, it's Kendre Miller. And so while I think that you have a
skill
point,
sets are different though. Like Jamal's the goal line. He'll be the thumper when Kamara can't go and kind of spell him there. Kendre Miller I think he has probably a little bit better hands. Jamal Williams not a pass catcher. And he has a little bit more explosion out of him, so they're going to try and get him in space. So he'll fill that part. So if Kamara goes down, it's going to take both of them to fill what he can do. Yeah. So I look at them as their skill sets are just different enough that I don't liken them in the same group.
Fair enough. I think the only way I want Kendre Miller is if I have Alvin Kamara. I think that's my value point for him.
Fair enough. I think Kendre Miller does have some potential standalone value here. He certainly is the handcuff for Kamara, but I do think that this is a guy that you can take as kind of your a running back for your roster. It wouldn't surprise me that if we can see him get up into some decent snap shares on this by the time the season's over. And this is a guy that did well last year in making guys miss tackles and continuing to put yards on the carry even after contact. So there's certainly some metrics to that are favorable on that one. And I do think that this is a guy that as a running back 4, certainly don't have really have a problem putting that on my roster. Do I think that we're going to see a massive breakout explosion? No, I don't necessarily see that, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him get up into like RB3 territory when the season's all said and done. Any other thoughts on Kendre Miller? Alrighty. Before we get to the next guy on the list, there's a trade question coming in, and this one coming from Terry over on YouTube. Welcome in, Terry. Trade question: trade away JT to acquire Coop, Najee, Rice, current team Murray, AJ Brown, Evans, Jonathan Taylor, Achane, Ferguson, Collins, benches Connor, Pickens, Warren, Jameson with Gus and Ford. It's a half-point redraft.
I don't know that I'd do it. I just don't know how it makes your starting lineup better, Terry. Like AJ Brown and Mike Evans, I think are more than capable of kind of carrying that. You have Nico, so yeah, you could say it helps your flex, but giving away JT to put Najee in your starting lineup every week, and then you're fighting the battle of Najee or Jaylen Warren, Gus and Ford. I don't know that I do this, man. I think I keep JT and do that. It's not a terrible offer, but I just don't see how it impacts your roster on a starting lineup perspective and makes you better week in and week out.
Right. And quite frankly, if that deal goes through, I'm more likely starting James Conner over Najee or Warren because I don't want to deal with that week in, week out. James Conner will, if he's healthy, maybe the more stable option there.
No,
So yeah, at that point, I'm out on it as well, Terry. Alex, any thoughts on this one?
It's intriguing, but yeah, I think you stay pat.
All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and head on over to Zach Charbonnet. And Zach Charbonnet, last year in his rookie year, 108 attempts, 462 yards, 1 touchdown on the ground, 33 receptions on 40 targets, 209 yards to the air. Thoughts on Zach Charbonnet?
Will there be a sophomore slump? Was last year good enough to warrant a sophomore slump? I think he did fine last year. Fine rookie campaign. I think I have ill will towards Zach Charbonnet, not because of anything that he did, but because I was a Kenneth Walker owner that was kind of blindsided by the Seahawks taking another running back in the second round the following season. So that was fun. But I think he has his own value. I think aside from Kenneth Walker, there is value. So I think there is standalone. I'm not sure. I mean, dart throw at 128. Sure. I think if you do have Kenneth Walker, grabbing Zach Charbonnet is a great handcuff. But I do think that there's very minimal standalone value, especially if Kenneth Walker can't go the whole season.
So I like Charbonnet here. I think because I'm a believer that the Seahawks offense is going to be much more efficient. And the Pete Carroll days of slow, kind of drawn out, hard nosed, old school football are kind of gone. You got to remember, their OC came from Washington, right? And we just saw what the Huskies did. They love to air it out, and yes, they can run the ball too, but they pass to set up the run, and that is a formula that does work in the NFL, right? We've seen many teams now go to that formula. You pass. And if you can get your quarterback and receivers in sync, it keeps those safeties back a little bit, and they're less likely to stack the box, and it gives your backs a little bit more room to run. So I think we'll see. I think we will see more than the 108 attempts and 40 targets out of Charbonnet. I think we could easily see closer to 150 rushing attempts, something like that. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see another 10 targets on top of all that. So to me, with only scoring 1 touchdown, I'd tell you this is his floor. Like, you are getting a great value on Zach Charbonnet right now. And it is very plausible to throw him on your lineup as your 4th running back, and you'll still have flex value out of him a lot of weeks once this Seattle offense kind of comes to fruition. And if why am I sorry guys, Kenneth Walker, good Lord. If Kenneth Walker does go down, then Charbonnet is stepping right into that lead role, right? Then we're seeing a whole bunch of volume come his way. So again, he's 1 play away. So I like the value on Charbonnet, and I'm very intrigued with him at this level.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a high-end handcuff type of guy here, right? If you've got Ken Walker, putting that on there, and you're able to rock and roll that. But I do like that thought, Kevin, that he does have some potential flex value down the road, because I do think that we are going to see a little bit more of a split on this than we saw last year between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So I certainly don't mind taking him in this range. Any other thoughts on Zach Charbonnet? All right, let's go ahead and look at Zeke Elliott. And Ezekiel Elliott last year with New England, 184 rush attempts, 642 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 51 receptions on 65 targets, 313 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Zeke?
So New England I don't feel like New England used Zeke the right way, right? And yes, I understand why Dallas had to let him go at the end of the 22 season and cap reasons and everything else. But I'm glad he's back because I think they just understand how to use him a bit better. His total touches between 22 and 23 were still they were almost identical, about 260. He had 260 compared to 245. So 15 more touches in 22 than 23. I think he makes that up. So I do think we see a bounce back, right? Like I think there's no way he's going. He will not finish outside of running back 3, right? So if he's inside the top 36, he is the lead back in Dallas. He is going to see the goal line work. And if you're doing a 0 RB or hero RB type draft strategy, this is a guy that you need to target because he is going to see a consistent workload and he is going to see valuable touches for the Cowboys. So um, I'm all about Zeke, and I'm not saying it's a return to the glory days where he's going to be a top 12 back, but I do think that there's going to be some opportunity here with Zeke to have a couple 3 touchdown games and help get your roster over the hump.
Look, the run play's got to go somewhere in Dallas, right? They're not going to be 100% pass. So the ball has to get handed off to somebody. It's more often than not going to be Zeke. So give me a lead back in an offense at pick 120. Yeah, I'll take it. I will hit draft and not think twice. There's no way that if Zeke is healthy all year, that he does not finish in at least RB3 territory, right? There's just no way by sheer numbers of opportunity he will have to finish in RB3 if he is healthy all year. So you're getting value here. You're getting a ton of value here. I think that Zeke, if he's still available after the first 36 running backs have gone, then you have gotten yourself a steal.
Yeah, I very much think that this is you're drafting Zeke kind of at the floor here, right? Like, not going to surprise me if we look up at the end of the season and we see him somewhere in the 170 to 180 rush attempts when this thing's all said and done, and probably somewhere around the 650 to 700 yard range and 5 touchdowns, at least on the ground, right? Like, I think all of those things are very, very plausible here. Zeke certainly does get work through the air as well, right? Like, not going to surprise me if we see we look up and we see Zeke have, probably in that 30 to 40 range on receptions with another 200 yards to the air and 1 or 2 touchdowns. Like, I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. And for a guy that you're drafting way late, this is a guy that could sneak up into, upper end RB3 territory.
Kevin said that he wouldn't be surprised if you see him get a couple 3 touchdown games. I think I heard you say that correctly. Is that what you said, Kevin? Mm-hmm. Like, inject that straight into my veins. If you're getting that at 41, give me multi-touchdown games all year. Like, a couple multi-touchdown games. Yes, please. Right. I don't know that you can say that about anybody that we've talked to is going to have a multi-touchdown game. Maybe Chuba Hubbard in the early going of the season, but in the first 10 running backs that we've talked about tonight, I don't think you can confidently say that they're at least not even 3 touchdowns, just multi-touchdown games, that they will have multiple multi-touchdown games. I'm not sure you can confidently say that, but we can about Zeke.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts on Zeke? All righty, let's go ahead and head on over to Gus Edwards. And Gus Edwards last season, come on, computer. There we go. Gus Edwards last season, 198 attempts, 810 yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, 12 receptions, 13 targets, 180 yards. Thoughts on Gus Edwards?
So his finish last year was definitely propped up by the 13 rushing touchdowns that he got in Baltimore, right? So I think we see some regression there. We see him fall back down to earth, even though Harbaugh does want to run the ball a lot. So I still think 40 is probably a bit low, right? If he's able to stay healthy, then I think you're going to get some good return here out of Gus Edwards. He is the healthy veteran on this roster right now. So one would presume that he is the lead back for what we would call a run heavy offense that we expect Jim Harbaugh to implement. So we start adding the math up, like this is too low for many of the same reasons that we said Zeke was too low, right? We just know what to expect out of McCarthy, and we're guessing on what we see out of Harbaugh. But the offensive line, again, health has been a weird thing for the Chargers along their offensive line. But if they can stay healthy, I think Gus pretty easily passes RB 40. Like he's another guy. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see him, up around RB 30 when it's all said and done with. So there's some built-in value. Again, you're grabbing a fourth running back this late here in the draft in most cases. Another guy to target if you're going zero or hero RB because you went wide receiver heavy to begin with. Like this guy and Zeke are kind of prime candidates. They're lead dogs in their situation. You expect them to see the goal line work. Like, does he catch the ball a whole lot? No. So he's going to hurt you a little bit. He's going to hurt you a little bit on the PPR side of things. But what you're hoping is the Chargers and Justin Herbert are efficient enough that they can get in the red zone and then they turn it to Edwards and then he crashes a few in. So that's really what you're hoping for. But, I think you see regression like I opened with. So I don't think 13 is the answer. I think it could be 8. Like that seems like an okay number, being the lead guy in a Harbaugh offense from a ground perspective. And you're going to see a couple other guys sprinkle in a couple on top of that. But I think you could get 8 out of that. It's just a matter of whether his yards per carry can stay up and efficient. If he can stay north of 4 yards per carry like he has every year of his career, he's going to be highly efficient. He will see the volume to do that. So it's just a matter of how much they're going to feed him and where in the field they're going to feed him. In between the 20s, and it doesn't help you because the touchdowns aren't there, and then he's right back to this RB 40 situation. He needs the goal line work and to fall into the end zone to get you there. He's not going to do it on volume and yardage alone.
I know he's in a new situation, leaving Baltimore, and he doesn't have Lamar Jackson as his quarterback, and I think that actually maybe helps him a little bit in the passing game, like oddly enough, because I don't know this for certain, but it feels like Lamar didn't really throw to his running backs all that often because he had great pass catching tight ends and the ability to run if he needed to, right? And you turn that running back into an extra blocker, you feel like you can get more yards that way. So, but Gus Edwards coming off a career year, right? Highs in carries, highs in rush yards, double. He had 13 touchdowns in his career in the first 4 seasons of his career, doubles it in one season, right? 13 touchdowns last year, like you said, Derek. Had highs in his pass work, 12 catches on 13 targets for 180. So I think those numbers do go up. I think the pass work goes up. But as far as running goes, here's what we've seen over Gus Edwards over his career: 718 yards, 711 yards, 723 yards, 433 yards on an injury-shortened season, which was basically half the year. So if you stat that out, we're looking at about 800 yards, and then 800 yards last year. So it stands to reason, again, different situation over there in LA versus Baltimore, but it stands to reason Gus Edwards is going to give you about 800 yards. I think 8 touchdowns is reasonable, Kevin. His previous high was 6 before the 13 touchdown season last year. So 8 touchdowns feels reasonable. And so you stat all that out, and how does that not get you a running back, 3 finish? It easily does, right? It easily gets you a running back 3 finish unless something crazy happens. And he's there at 40. Yeah, this is a no-brainer value.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, this is one of those that not going to surprise me if we look up at the end of the season, we see Gus Edwards around 165, 175 target rushing attempts, somewhere kind of in that range. And if he's at 170 rush attempts, in that, and kind of returns to form a little bit closer to that 5 yards per carry that he had than the 4 that he's had throughout than the last season, right? Like, this is a guy that should crack 800 yards when it's all said and done. And I think it will probably see him, get 7, maybe 8 touchdowns when it's all said and done here, right? So there's a tremendous amount of upside here. I don't know that we're going to see him necessarily get all the way up into running back 14 on the season type of finish, but this is a guy that you drafted at 40 and could get into RB2 territory here. Again, kind of a murky situation with this backfield, having J.K. Dobbins there, having Kamani Vidal there as well, the rookie. But this is, again, one of those that this is a guy that could outkick his ADP and perform better than that. So I think that Gus Edwards is certainly a value in this range. Any other thoughts on Gus Edwards? All righty, let's go ahead and take a look at Chase Brown. And Chase Brown last year, 44 rush attempts, 179 yards, 0 touchdowns on the ground, 14 receptions on 15 targets, 156 yards, and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Chase Brown?
So Chase Brown is he's a I don't know if he's a fantasy darling, right? He's only been in the league 1 year, but he's a guy that has a lot of buzz around him. He had a lot of buzz around him coming into as a rookie and kind of got buried on the depth chart, right? 14 attempts, 15 targets. Whoop did he do? Now he's number 2. So I think we're going to see this tick up. His ADP, to me, is a little inflated. Like, it just, you don't run the whole, excuse me, let me form my thought. You don't run the ball a whole lot in Cincinnati to begin with, and Cincinnati has predominantly featured a single back. Now, there's a difference between Zach Moss and Joe Mixon, but if Joe Burrow is back, you're passing to set up the run. This is another offense where they are a throw-first offense. You have T. Higgins, you have Jamar Chase, you have Jermaine Burton, who you drafted. There's plenty of options in the passing game there. Chase Brown is a guy that I'm staying away from. I'm not even using as a handcuff. Like, I will blow my fab if Zach Moss tears a knee, and then to get the lead back in Cincinnati, that's where I will blow a lot of my fab to get that and be part of that offense. But he's another guy, much like we talked about earlier. Other than that, he's going to be sitting on your bench just taking up a spot. And Zach Moss is not highly coveted enough for me to warrant needing his backup on my roster. So I think this is another guy. He's going to get drafted because someone's going to fall in love with him. And then I think after 3 or 4 weeks, they're going to realize I need to drop this guy to pick up someone who can actually do something for my team. And then you start kind of keeping an eye on him when he's bouncing around the waiver wire. But he's a guy that I am not actively going after to start my draft. I will look at him on the waiver wire, middle of the season, really understand what his snap percentage is, what his workload's starting to look like, and make an informed decision. But he did nothing last year to make me think, ooh, yeah, this guy's going to garner. We're going to see, 120 touches out of him. They're going to find a way to get the ball in his hands. Man, he might see 80 touches this year. Like, he'll double his workload, but I don't know that doubling does anything for me when you have to take him just outside of RB3 territory.
I was going to make the same comment that Terry has just made in the comments here myself. I was wondering if you guys had seen Joe Burrow's new hairstyle. He's gone full Eminem. It is bleach blonde. It is not a high and tight, but it's not a full buzz cut, but basically, like a 4 all the way around, right? That's what Joe Burrow's coming into the season with. Like, this is going to be the Joe Burrow, I'm still the best young quarterback in this league tour. And like, it feels like the running backs are going to just be there because they have to be. Like they are obligated to play a running back every week. And that's what's going to happen. I say all that. I don't have any interest in Chase Brown. I think Kevin made a great point. I think that if Joe Burrow had his way, he's throwing the football 65 times a game. Like that's the way that I think Joe Burrow wants this offense to operate this year. I just don't think that if Zach Moss gets hurt, Chase Brown has value, but I'm not there.
Yeah, fair enough. This is a hard pass for me, right? Like, not many times do I look at a player and just almost go, I'm not going to draft him and I'm not going to put him on my roster. That is the case with Chase Brown here. And when I'm looking at when I'm going to be on the clock, if my option is Chase Brown and anybody else in that 10th round type of thing, it's anybody else. Not even looking to put him on my roster as a handcuff if I take Zach Moss earlier. So I am out on Chase Brown. Any other thoughts on Chase Brown? All righty. Let's head on over and look at Blake Corum. And Blake Corum last year was with Michigan, and the rookie coming in to the Rams. Thoughts on Blake Corum?
So I am treating Corum as the ultimate handcuff to Kyren Williams. I don't know that I want, or I don't know that I'm going to go out and search him out if I don't have Kyren. But if I have Kyren Williams, just with the uncertainty and how McVay runs a single back so hard, if I have Kyren, I'm absolutely going after Blake. And I will overdraft him to get him because we've seen how valuable the Rams lead back can be. We saw it with Todd Gurley. We've seen it, Cam Akers had a stint in it, right? And then we saw it with Kyren Williams. So McVay's offense leads to running back success, right? It's that outside zone scheme. If they can read and find the cutback lane, they are fantasy gold. Corum did some of that in college, right? Corum was a good running back at Michigan. He really was. He's got a nose. He's got a nose for the ball. He doesn't shy away from contact. He's a passionate locker room leader. Some of those intangibles that we probably don't give enough credit to, Corum does possess those. So I like the kid a lot. But if Kyren Williams is able to stay on the field, I don't like Corum very much for fantasy purposes this year. Just because we have yet to see Sean McVay go to a true two-back. He loves his lead running back. And right now, Kyren Williams is a really good pass pro back for Sean McVay's offense. So for Blake to get worked into the offense, he has to show that he can be even more trustworthy than a guy who already does a good job. He's going to get his fair share of work. You can't have Kyren on the field every snap, but he did play a ton. He averaged 55 snaps per game last year when he was on the field. So they did not spell him a whole hell of a lot. But maybe you think, okay, give him a little bit more rest, try and preserve him. Not that the ankle injury was, a soft tissue thing, right? But any little nicks come up, you preserve him a little bit more. So there's interest in him. Not much if I don't have Kyren. But again, back to my lead point. If I have Kyren Williams, I am searching out Blake Corum, and I will overdraft him to make sure I have my handcuff because that is fantasy gold when the Rams offense is clicking.
Cosign.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is kind of the same boat, right? Like if I've got Kyren, we're smashing yes on Blake Corum. If I don't have Kyren, it's a hard pass at that point, right? Like I don't see any standalone value. This is handcuff territory only for me. So any other thoughts on Blake Corum? All right, let's go ahead and head on over, take a look at Nick Chubb. And, not often do we talk about Nick Chubb kind of down here in this territory, but last season, certainly a very injury-shortened year, 28 attempts, 170 yards, no touchdowns on the ground. had 4 receptions on 4 targets for 21 yards. Thoughts on Nick Chubb?
Smashing yes. Smashing yes. So here, I love me some Nick Chubb, right? And yes, I'm a Georgia homer, but Nick Chubb is probably my favorite NFL player right now. Like I love the guy. I love how he runs. I love how he handles his business on the field. The fact that this is the second major knee injury that he's working his way back from doesn't really scare me because they were so far apart, right? The first one was at college. That was still a cheap shot from Tennessee. I don't care what anybody says. They were absolutely hunting for him, and he was already out of bounds when they took his knee out. Those dirty Vols. Outside of that, his rehab's going well, right? He is already squatting, I don't even know, a bazillion pounds, right? Did you see that, Alex? Like he had 6 plates on each side. The bar's about ready to snap around the backside of his shoulders, and he's doing it almost effortlessly. So
Yeah.
I can only wait until he's able to get on the field, starts to cut, and feel comfortable again. But he's the guy. I have no problem getting him here, and I'm okay waiting. Like I just showed you guys a roster that I just drafted, and heck yeah, I'll find Nick Chubb on there. You're able to get him for, at pick 116 in a single quarterback league. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not asking him to be the top guy right away. I want Nick Chubb for weeks 12 through 16, 17, right? That's where I want Nick Chubb. I'm not drafting him before his bye week. I want him after his bye week in week 10. I think it's week 10, maybe week 12. That's where I want him to shine. But if I can get him at this value and I just dabble to see how he's coming back, maybe I stick him in the flex, maybe not. And if I have some injuries and I got to stick him in there by week 7 or 8, so be it. But this guy is too freaking good to be this disrespected. And when he is healthy, and he will get healthy, the Browns are not going to use Jerome Ford a whole hell of a lot. Nick Chubb will have 65, 70% of those snaps at running back. And Ford will be used as a spell back and a change of pace guy, but this is going to be run through Nick Chubb once he is fully cleared for contact and in NFL game shape. And I'm not even questioning it. So this late, smash, yes. I love this pick.
We're going to talk. I mean, look, Ford's next up on the list here. And that to me screams that people are scared of the injury, right? They're scared. It was September when Nick Chubb had that. And yeah, it's a serious injury, but we're talking a full year removed. The videos online are just ridiculous. And so I'm not concerned about his injury, his rehab or anything. And I know that there's nothing definitive yet from the team, but I'm not concerned about it. So to me, when you've got 2 running backs on the same team, basically going right next to each other, as is the case with Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb, like it screams to me that fantasy owners are scared of the injury. They are too much on recency bias from last year, right? Because Jerome Ford, look, if Chubb doesn't go down, we don't know about Jerome Ford, right? Like Jerome Ford does not have the season that he had last year, if not for the injury to Nick Chubb, and if not for the injury to Deshaun Watson, right? Where the Browns had to become a different team because they weren't firing on all cylinders. They had to become a different offense for that matter. So I think that Nick Chubb at this spot, even if you get Nick Chubb for 14 games, like you're still going to get a great value here at pick 38 at running back. 37. Like he can't finish outside of running back 3 territory if he's healthy and plays at least 3/4 of the games.
I'd take him at 10. I'd take him at 10 games. Like,
yeah, sure.
If I knew I had to sit on Nick Chubb for the first, 7 or 8 weeks of the regular season, and then you got all that production for the final home stretch, I'd still take him there. Like to the point where his ADP, is what 116 overall. I'd take him. I'd take him at late 80s, early 90s. I'd take him 2 rounds earlier than where he's going right now. And I think I could sleep at night and build a roster around that with what I expect to happen. I could be proven dead wrong, right? Like, earmark the video, come week 16, if he's still not doing trash and you got bounced out of the playoffs because you were forced to play Nick Chubb, holler at me. Like, that's fine. You can reference this and say I was dead wrong. I don't think I am, though. Like, I think the value and the points per game basis that you are going to get out of Nick Chubb will far outweigh you having to save, a roster spot for him for the first 5 or 6 weeks, if it even comes to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, right? Like, this is a guy that I have been in drafts, especially in best ball type of formats, in redraft type of formats, snagging up, right? Like, this is a guy that you can get him coming off the board as your 4th running back. And really, what are the guys that we've talked about so far tonight that are, looking at this, that, we've had the ability to say, oh, it's a high-end handcuff if the guy goes ahead of him goes down, type of thing. I'm right there with you. I think if Nick Chubb is healthy, right, before the injury, he was the best running back in the National Football League and the best pure running back in the National Football League by a wide margin, right? And I don't care who else you want to try and throw at me name wise. Like, that was the case. The injury was gruesome, yes, but you don't see guys bounce back from this and squatting like he is. Because I saw the video that you're referencing there, Kevin, where the guy is getting after it on this one, and trainers, all of those, they're not going to let him push that deal if he's not able to handle it and do that coming off of that kind of injury and what they're planning on probably utilizing him for. So I'm right there with you. I think that this is a guy that I certainly don't have an issue drafting early, taking him, well earlier than ADP, just to make sure that I kind of get that roster spot and get his services there. Because again, right, he's going to be at best the 3rd or 4th running back on my roster, and I think there's a whole lot of value that he will deliver. And not going to surprise when we look up at the end of the season and we see him well inside of running back 2 territory and flirting with RB1 territory. Any other thoughts on Nick Chubb? All right, let's go ahead and look at Jerome Ford. And Jerome Ford last season, 204 attempts, 813 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 44 receptions, 63 targets, 319 yards through the air, and 5 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Jerome Ford?
So here's Ford's receiving work was just enough to kind of keep him relevant. So here was part of my issue as a guy who went out and spent a lot of fab on Jerome Ford to get him on my roster after Nick Chubb went down. He had a couple games where in the first quarter he'd have like 70 yards and then would get 12 the rest of the game. Like, now part of this was a weird Cleveland offense. Deshaun wasn't the same, and he went down and then just doing some other things. But he had I think he had 2 70-plus yard runs last season, which obviously kind of go into these stats, but they're misleading, right? You take out those 70-yard runs, you're down 150 yards, your yards per carry drops precipitously, right? And you're back down in that 3.2 yards per carry. This guy's not an elite back. He got there based off of volume. He was explosive enough that he broke a couple long ones at the right time for fantasy purposes. And yes, it all counts at the end of the day. But let me tell you, there were a couple games where I really needed him to show up, and it did not happen. And it is what it is. It's fantasy football, but I'm not going to completely forget that. Like, this guy is just not built to be a all-pro back. Nick Chubb is the all-pro back. And whatever workload you think you're going to get out of Jerome Ford, you get in weeks 1 through 4, and then they really start kind of splitting carries for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden he's sitting on the bench when you need him most towards the playoffs. So why wouldn't you Go Chubb. He's one spot later. Why wouldn't you take Chubb and take the slow start and build up to the finish line? It's the tortoise or the hare conversation, right? Nick Chubb is the tortoise in this situation. He will start slow, rehabbing the injury, coming back. But guess who's going to cross the finish line? Who's going to get you there? Rub-a-dub Chubb, baby. Like it's just. I don't mind Jerome Ford. If I could split them out, I'd handcuff them. Right? The fact that they're going back to back doesn't necessarily help me. It's not a situation like Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, like what we talked about here a couple players ago. So I will pass on Jerome Ford and I will grab Nick Chubb because they're going back to back. And I want the guy who's going to get me to the ship, not the guy who's going to win me a regular season game or two.
If you're doing a 0 RB, plausible that you could swing this. You could swing a Nick Chubb, a Zeke, and a Chuba Hubbard in basically rounds 11, 12, and 13. Like, how stinking good is that? Considering that you've probably gotten positional advantages everywhere else, you can still have lead back for the first couple of weeks at least. And like, that would be fantastic. Like that's very plausible that you could do. But you don't need a Jerome Ford. Look, Jerome Ford made the most of his opportunity last year. I don't think that opportunity is there again this year. So for those reasons, if I have to pick between the two, because you have to pick between the two with where they're going, I'm going to go Nick Chubb.
Yes, I would also go the Nick Chubb route over the Jerome Ford side of things, right? Like Kevin hit the nail on the head pretty well there when talking about how that shaped up and how that was utilized there. Now this is one of those that Jerome Ford still may have some value in this Cincinnati or this Cleveland offense, even after the Chubb return there, just due to some of the passing work, right? Like that's not necessarily a spot that we've seen Nick Chubb really utilize throughout his career and is in the passing side of things. So there could be some potential value there, but this is a guy too that's going to have to ultimately kind of stave off both Donta Foreman, who could come in on the early part of the season for 1-2 down type of work there and be a spell back, and we've seen Donta Foreman look good and stretches down the deal there. So there could be some work split with Jerome Ford early in the season there, and Nyheim Hines, who at one point was certainly one of the premier pass catching running backs in the league, is on this roster as well. So that's one of those two that there's competition for Jerome Ford outside of Nick Chubb, even if Nick Chubb returns late. So this is one of those that I have a hard time believing that we're going to see Jerome Ford outproduce his ADP at this point. I think that this is one of those we'll see him finish below where you end up taking him. So any other thoughts on Jerome Ford? All righty. Terry saying at least at worst he'll get the Hunt role. Give him Ford. Chubb can have a setback at any moment. I mean, any player can get hurt at any moment. So anyway, I get where you're going, Terry.
I can understand the line of thinking. It's not what I think, but I can understand the line of thinking.
Absolutely. All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next guy up here, Trey Benson. And Trey Benson, the rookie coming on over to Arizona from Florida State. Thoughts on Trey Benson?
Love the dynasty pick. And even like the best ball flyer, if that's what it is. But James Conner's done a pretty good job staying healthy here the last few years. And James Conner's done a lot with his opportunities. We expect the Cardinals offense to be in better shape this coming year than what they were last year. A fully healthy Kyler Murray, the draft pick, obviously, with Marvin Harrison Jr. And then you have McBride, their tight end, to kind of take some relief off of that. So they have a few more options there. So I think Benson's going to see some work for sure. Like, I don't know if he's going to see enough work to be right here on the cusp of RB3 territory. he could get there. Like this might be about where he finishes, but I think we've just covered a couple guys, Nick Ford and waiting a little bit longer, where I'd probably pivot off of Trey Benson and go somewhere else unless I'm really holding on to this, zero RB strategy and I'm just trying to load up on guys with potential. I like him a lot more next year, right? And I think everybody will. So if you're in a keeper league and you can get him here, maybe this is worth it, right? And ends up taking over that lead back and you get some value there on a keeper side of things. But on a true redraft, I don't know that Trey Benson's quite there or that Arizona is going to feature him and James Conner quite enough to get me excited to draft Trey Benson at 111 overall when I know that I just gushed all over Nick Chubb, right? Like if those guys are still sitting there, I'm going to pivot down and go to Nick Chubb.
Handcuff? Yeah, that's what I see him. I'll go handcuff. If I have a James Conner, but there are other options, right? Like there, as you said, where there's lead back options still in play here. I think if you feel strongly about this Arizona offense and you want to make sure that you protect yourself against a James Conner injury, which, as Kevin said, is unlikely, but could still happen. I think he's handcuffed at best, but options behind him are better.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, right? Like James Conner throughout his career has never actually played a full season. And the last 2 seasons we've seen him, miss a few games, 13 games in each season there. So there is some potential handcuff ability here, right? Like so that's kind of where I see Trey Benson this season, more of a handcuff type of role. But this is again is one of those that James Conner is going late enough into to drafts that there's not a ton of difference in the rounds in a lot of cases there, right? Like we're talking 20, 30 picks for a handcuff type of deal, and so that does make it tough to try and go the handcuff route there. When this thing's all said and done, too, Trey Benson does have big playability and does have the ability to the pull away speed, the breakout speed, and just run by people. But so there's some potential for that. Where I kind of like Trey Benson is more in a best ball type of format, more so than with a redraft type of format. And like Kevin mentioned, really like him in a keeper style or a dynasty type of pickup there. But from a redraft standpoint, it will be tough to go ahead and roster Trey Benson on that front. Any other thoughts on Trey Benson? All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at Tyjae Spears. And Tyjae Spears last year, 100 rush attempts, 453 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 52 receptions, 70 targets, 385 yards, and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Tyjae Spears?
If you can keep his 4.5 yards per carry average up, I'd love to see him get some more volume. Right now, being behind Derrick Henry last year was probably a good learning experience, right? Like I don't know if you could pick a much better person to learn from on how to play the position, even though they're built so differently. Spears is good out of the passing game. I think that helps, even though Will Levis, I think, is going to try and drive the ball down the field a bit more. Excuse me, Jiminy Christmas this year. But I do think his volume goes up as we see him and Tony Pollard trying to split carries here a little bit. So I don't mind the Tyjae Spears, again, especially if I'm waiting on running back a little bit. I think this Tennessee offense is probably going to be a little bit better than what a lot of us are giving them credit for. So I don't mind the flyer on Tyjae necessarily. I like him more than the next guy we're about ready to talk about. So I guess there's that. And I think I like him a little bit more than Trey Benson just because I see a clear path for him right away. So RB3, I mean, yeah, back end of RB3. I think that fits about right. Maybe he outperforms it a little bit depending on what he's able to do as far as getting into the end zone, right? If he's 150 carries for, 600-ish yards and he gets 80 targets for 60 grabs, another 500 yards and an extra touchdown. Like, you can see him sneak up inside the top 30.
Okay, can Tony Pollard be a lead back? Like, he had an opportunity in Dallas last year. It didn't work, right? Can Tony Pollard be a lead back? Can Tajay Spears supplant him? Like, Tajay Spears is capable. I think the only reason that Tony Pollard was on the field so much is that there wasn't really anything behind him. There is now. So if Tony Pollard can't be the lead back there, then Tajay Spears has every chance to become one. So I'll go out and say it. I don't see how he finishes below RB3 territory. It just like it is there for the taking for him. And if he somehow, which I don't think is entirely unreasonable, supplants Tony Pollard as the lead back in that offense, and that offense is going to look different, right? Than what it was in years past. Then like this is floor, in my opinion. If he can get to be the top dog there.
Yeah, fair enough. There's a lot to say about where Tajay Spears could be, right? Because he was very explosive when we saw him on the field last year, right? Like, had lots of really, really good plays, could certainly break something loose there. This is an interesting kind of pair up between Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, where similar kind of skill sets when you see these guys kind of back to back there. And again, this was one that Tennessee could be surprising when it's all said and done as far as this offense goes, right? They've certainly kind of revamped some things there. So not going to surprise me if we see Tajay, get up as far as like an RB, 23, 24, kind of in that range. Like, I could see him getting into back end RB2 territory, but I think it's a pretty safe floor for him to be kind of right around RB30. So I do see that there's some potential value in this pick, and it could certainly outperform his current ADP. Any other thoughts on Tajay Spears? All righty. Let's take a look at Austin Ekeler. And Austin Ekeler last year, 179 rush attempts, 628 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 51 receptions on 74 targets, 436 yards, and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Austin Ekeler?
I think he's going to be used for his passing work, right? Brian Robinson is not a pass-catching back. That's why the two of them are back-to-back, just like the Cleveland backs were, right? You don't see it too terribly often, but we're seeing it a couple times this year. So Eckler's going to be used as a pass-catching back. We're going to see how Jaden Daniels uses the running back, right? Like, is he going to use him as that relief valve? Are we going to see Ekeler get, back up in these crazy high target areas? Kind of back in where his prime was with a number 2 and a number 1 overall finish. I don't know. I mean, that's some pretty high levels to get to, but I could see him with 90 targets. It's just the efficiency behind those targets from Daniels, right? Does he come down with, 65 out of 90, or is he able to get like 72 or 73 out of the 90 and really do something with those? So PPR leagues, I do have some interest in Ekeler because that's where all of his work's coming in. If it's a standard league, no, probably not so much. Like, I'm going to go other places. There's too many unknowns about this Washington offense. But in a PPR league, I do have some interest there.
I think a good pass catching running back is a young quarterback's best friend. I think if Jaden Daniels utilizes him the way that he should, that we all think he should, Eckler's value is there. I think that what we saw last year is probably closer to what we'll see again this year. 6 total touchdowns last year, right? He was up over 1,000 total yards when you combine, rushing and receiving, and that was with having missed 3 games. So I think that what we saw last year is probably pretty close. That finished him where, excuse me, Derek, last year?
He was in the 30s.
Yeah. So, like, what you see is what you get. You're drafting not value, but you're not drafting anything I think that's going to hurt you.
Yeah. My apologies. Finished at RB 28.5 point PPR.
Okay. So like, you're not getting too much in terms of a leap in value here from where he's going. It's not a huge jump, right? 33 to 28. Yeah. Five spots feels like a rounding error. It's not a huge deal.
Yeah, there wasn't much that separated him out there from points wise between 28 and in the 30s, right? Like 5-6 points type of thing over the course of a season. So this is very much that the role that we're going to see out of Antonio Gibson or out of Austin Eckler is very similar to what I think we saw last year with Antonio Gibson. Yes, there's certainly some offensive changeover that's happening with this, and the Cliff Kingsbury system coming into play here. All of those things. However, when it's all said and done, right? Like Antonio Gibson did not have a very good fantasy season last year. I think that we see similar type of role for Austin Eckler this year as to what Antonio Gibson did, with a little bit more work and a little bit more upside there, but not much more. So this is one of those that it very much feels like you're kind of drafting Austin Eckler at the ceiling. I don't know that there's a ton of value to be had, drafting him here. A little bit of intrigue when it comes to the pass catching work and some of the, in a PPR type of standpoint. But other than that, it is awfully tough to hit the draft yes and move on button when Austin Eckler's name is kind of in that, on the board there. Any other thoughts on Austin Eckler? All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at Brian Robinson Jr. And Brian Robinson Jr. last year, 178 rush attempts, 733 yards, 5 touchdowns, 36 receptions on 43 targets, 368 yards, and 4 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Brian Robinson Jr.?
I think I like Eckler more. Like, if I'm going to take a Washington running back, I think I like Eckler more just for his passing work.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because Robinson got just enough passing work to be fairly effective because of the touchdowns, right? Because he got 4 receiving touchdowns to go along with his 5 on the ground. So that's really what helped get him there. But again, I don't know how Jaden Daniels is going to use these running backs in the passing game. Like, he likes to throw the ball, right? Like, he's not a running quarterback, but he has the capability to run, right? So, the question is, does Jaden Daniels play more like Mahomes or more like Josh Allen? And I'm not saying he's that caliber yet. I'm just simply saying those two do have stark contrast, right? Like, Mahomes will run to get out of trouble and get a first down. Allen will run to get points on the board. Slightly different build. I understand all that, but just the general thought process is intriguing to me. So I'm probably shying away from Robinson and really probably Eckler too. Like, I just don't want to fight that battle with an offense that I don't trust to be very good this year. As I'm putting together a fantasy team, Washington players are not necessarily at the top of my board. They're not high profile offenses. They're not offenses that I can trust put points up on the board week in and week out. You can see just as many weeks that the Redskins only score 13 points as you do, the
Commanders
weeks that they get over 20. Yeah, Commanders. Whoa, that was a Freudian slip. Holy smokes. It's been years since they've been that. Yeah, sorry. So I'm really shying away from everything Washington this year. Jaden Daniels I have in some dynasty leagues. Like, that's where I grabbed a Washington player, was Daniels in dynasty leagues, if I was able to get my hands on him at number 2. Outside of that, redraft leagues, I'm shying away.
Go ahead. I said my piece. I'd rather have Eckler than Robinson.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is one of those that I'm kind of right there on board, right? Like if I've got to pick one of them, I'm going to pick Eckler because of the passing work and the PPR side of things is more valuable for fantasy, especially in a half point or full point PPR there, right? But yeah, there's really a couple of games from a that kind of skewed Brian Robinson's overall fantasy finish last year. Because when you look at it, he actually had a fairly good finish, right? RB2 territory last season at RB22. Even though there wasn't necessarily a ton of volume there when it came to running the ball, there was just enough passing work. But the 9 touchdowns certainly got that into play there. And there was a couple of those games that he ended up putting up some pretty monster weeks there. Week 2 against Denver, where he finished running back 1 overall. That definitely kind of skewed things out of
Yeah,
it
who
there.
didn't finish number 1 overall against Denver last year?
Right. And then number 3 against Seattle, that week 10, right? Outside of those, there really wasn't another running back 1 type of finish. There was a couple of RB2 finishes, but there was a lot of RB3 type of finishes there, week in, week out. So not necessarily a model of consistency. And there's other guys in this territory that I'd rather be drafting that I think we will see more week in and week out consistency for this upcoming season. Any other thoughts on Brian Robinson Jr.? All right, let's go ahead and hit up Devin Singletary. And Devin Singletary last year, 216 rush attempts, 898 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 30 receptions on 38 targets, 193 yards through the air. Thoughts on Devin Singletary?
Pass. This scares the crap out of me. And I get that they have to give the ball to somebody. If I'm going to take a deep flyer on a Giants running back, I'm going Tyrone Tracy, right? Like I don't want any part of this. Like, I don't think the Giants offense is very good. I don't think that they have a creative scheme. I don't think their offensive line can hold up. I think Daniel Jones is a basket case. Like, Malik Neighbors is going to have a really tough time unless he is like Odell Beckham 2.0 and able to just have a phenomenal season with a quarterback who struggles mightily. On top of the fact that Daniel Jones runs, right? I mean, I don't know that you really improve on any of these Singletary numbers because Daniel Jones can run much like Josh Allen. He just doesn't get the touchdowns, but he takes plays away from the running backs and the passing game because he scrambles. Part of that's because he has no time. But I really don't like this at all. Like, I think his yards per carry is going to be sub 4, which is not really enticing. Maybe 4 touchdowns again, but I mean, sub 900 yards, or really sub 850 is probably where I think he's going to end up being with this offense. Like, I just don't see the path to success for Devin Singletary. So I'm staying completely away from this pick.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think there's going to be a lot of people who fall in love with him based on the off-season Hard Knocks, right? I think there's going to be a lot of people that will fall in love with the Bears players, right? As we get into they're going to do training camp Hard Knocks with the Bears. So there's probably going to be an inflation of Bears valuations, right? As we get in there. I think you're right, Kevin. I think what you saw last year is like what you're going to get. And it's what we've seen the last couple of years out of him in Buffalo and in Houston, right at 870, call it close to 850, 900 yards, right? Like there's very little difference there. Passing work was a little bit down last year. And I do think that Daniel Jones is going to take away some of the running work that Devin Singletary gets just because he'll turn into a lead blocker and not a pass catcher or a runner himself. So I am also going to pass on Devin Singletary, although it is nice to have a lead back. I just feel like he's going a little higher than he should, based on where that offense is. Like, I'll tell you, there were guys that I said, oh, I'd rather have this person. Like, I would again. I know that I think Nick Chubb, where we're sitting here talking, I think that's too low for him. I think that number moves up, but like, I'd rather take a Zeke, and you're getting a 3-round discount on Zeke, right? Like, you're getting that's 3 other players that you can get, and then get a lead back in an explosive offense that you know is going to get running work because the quarterback doesn't run the football. Again, I think I'd rather have a Chuba Hubbard, and that's 60 picks difference right there, essentially. So that's where I'm at with Devin Singletary.
Fair enough. I'll be the differing viewpoint on this one. So this is one of those that I really don't mind Devin Singletary at this kind of draft spot at this value. I do think that this is kind of, you're drafting him about at his floor. Do I think that you're going to see much improvement over this one? No, not really, right? Like, I do think that when this thing's all said and done, we may see Devin Singletary finish up inside of, like the ceiling on this thing might be running back 23, 22 type of thing, right? But when he's coming off the board at RB 31, I think that's about where we'll see him finish. As far as production for this year, I think we'll probably see Devin Singletary somewhere around 200 carries when this thing's all said and done, and roughly right around about 800 yards, probably 4 or 5 touchdowns. So very, very similar numbers to last year, and we'll probably see him get into that very back end RB2, top end RB3 territory, which is kind of right where you're drafting him. And if you're putting him on your roster as your third, as your third back, there's certainly I certainly don't have a problem with that. And I think there's some other guys that I would certainly go with him over some of the other guys you kind of around him as well. So any other thoughts on Devin Singletary? All righty. Well, that takes us to the end of the list. Any thoughts on anybody that maybe we didn't mention that's kind of outside that top 50?
I think Tyrone Tracy's interesting as a deep rookie flyer. Audric Estime out of Denver is very interesting as a deep rookie flyer. Dominic Prince is the guy who was getting the second round worth of touches in Kansas City after Pacheco got his reps in. So I think that does create a little bit of intrigue. So I think there's a couple guys, right, who are further down this list for deep flyers, whether it's best ball, obviously guys, they're picked up in dynasty leagues, but I mean, just folks to keep eyes on, right, that do have a path to volume. And really, I think all 3 of those guys, I'd rather have on my roster than like an Antonio Gibson or Kamani Vidal, right? 2 guys that we talked about at the very beginning of the show. I think I'd rather have all those guys there because Vidal, I'm not convinced that he's not going to end up like 4th on the depth chart. All these guys are like 2nd or 3rd, depending on how you're looking at it. So, and in better offenses than New England or the Chargers. So it just, well, maybe not estimate. The Denver offense is a train wreck. We'll see how that goes. But, I mean, so those are a couple guys that kind of came to mind there. Nothing too crazy, though, right? Like, I think this is kind of where you draw the line. This is where most of the draft boards are going to stop for the running back position. And this is probably about where we'll run rankings through here very shortly as we put ours together after we do all the player profiles.
Right. Jaleel McLaughlin's another guy that I would mention kind of in that range as well. A guy that could be poised for a little bit bigger season than he had last season. So, another guy.
That shit was predictable, man. Every time he was on the field, they gave him the ball. It was so predictable. Oh, McLaughlin's on the field. Guess who's getting the football? Right here. Like his touch percentage per snap had to be no joke, man. It had to be in the upper 80s.
Fair enough. All righty. Any other thoughts, final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
We'll keep
Thanks.
cranking this out. Good luck in draft season.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Shoot us any questions you got at Good Old Boys FF. You can find us wherever you consume your social media content, except for X, because, well, they make it difficult to put free content up on the web. So, boo to that platform. That's okay. We'll move and pivot. Go to YouTube. Check out our page at YouTube. At Good Old Boys FF again. Like, subscribe. You get the notifications. You can interact with us. It gives you, the little bell every time we go live. And then, outside of that, good luck. Go crush it. Get that cash and trophies.
I like it. All righty. Well, guys, that's going to do it for us tonight. We'll be back next Tuesday, 11 p.m. Eastern. You're going through running backs. What is that? 11 through 30, I believe. And then we'll rock and roll with a special 2-time next week to finish out the running backs here to get everybody rock and roll. And then it's into draft strategy and rankings and all that good stuff. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you for tuning in. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloos.